Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to the episode of Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for miniature wargamers who want stunning tabletop quality miniatures without breaking the bank. In this series, we'll show you how to save money on your miniatures painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. So whether you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And on today's video, we'll be showing you guys how to quickly and more importantly cheaply paint up the monstrous Ghorgon for your armies of beastmen brayhordes for your games of Warhammer the Old World. And by following the tips, techniques, and materials that we suggest in this video, we can help you save over $169.19 with initial cheapskate method cost of $49.14. So that being said, let's go ahead and talk about how to quickly and cheaply paint up the Ghorgon for your beastmen brayhorde armies. Alright, so the very first thing you have to do, of course, is assemble miniature and also texture the bases. In this case, I like to use a wood glue as well as sand mixture for my bases. What I do is I paint the base for the part that I want texturing on with wood glue, and then I dust it with some sand from my backyard garden. After that, I let it dry, and then I can make a 50-50 mixture of water as well as wood glue into a slurry, and I put that all over the part of the texture that I had on the base, so that way it dries, it creates out airtight seals, so that way nothing flakes off the base during the painting process. Now, as for priming is an important step in miniature painting because what it does, it gives a surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to. Unfortunately, if you were to apply acrylic paints directly onto bare plastic, just the slightest bit of friction would cause the paint to rub off your miniature, which of course would then ruin the overall finish. So priming does a really good job of actually preventing that from happening. Another thing that priming also does too is it tends to have a strong impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you use on your miniature. Traditionally speaking, the more subdued or darker the paint tone, the darker the primer, and the more vibrant or bright the paint scheme you plan on doing for your miniature, the brighter the paint scheme. Now in this situation, because I want to paint this guy very quickly and cover a lot of area very quickly, what I use flat red primer from Rust-Oleum. I get this at my local Walmart. It costs a couple of bucks. And what I do is I spray the entirety of the miniature down with this reddish brownish color, so that way a lot of the flesh as well as the fur of the miniature is already painted for me. Now this miniature is quite large and it does have a lot of flesh exposed on the miniature, so in order to quickly paint up that flesh, what we're going to do is we're going to use dry brushing. What dry brushing does is it creates the illusion of depth in your miniature by allowing the brighter colors of the pigment of the paint to adhere to the raised surface of the miniature while the darker colors stay in the recesses. And as you can see, we're just going to do a really rough dry brush with Flesh by Apple Paint. You get this at your local Walmart. And I use this for all the exposed flesh that's on the Ghorgon. Things like the faces, for example, the limbs, as well as the chest, as well as the back and the back of the legs as well. Now traditionally speaking, when you do a dry brushing, you want to start with a very light dry brush and then build up successive layers of brightness as you go, because it's very easy to add more brightness and detail to your miniature, but it's very difficult to go back to back to the base coat if you want to do less. Now for this one, I did a really heavy dry brush and real quickly just because I knew exactly I wanted a lot of flesh on this miniature. But as you can see, that dark bright red primer is still in the recesses of the musculature, while the raised surface of the musculature has that flesh color. And to bring out just a little bit more detailing on the flesh, we're going to do another layer of dry brushing, this time with Delta Cerancoats Peaches and Cream. It's a pale flesh color that you get at your local Hobby Lobby. I'm just going to dust this all over the entire of the miniature one last time, just to make sure we get that additional highlighting on the miniature for all the musculature, as well as the flesh exposed in the miniature. And as weird as it may sound, we actually have a lot of the miniature already painted in terms of its flesh because of this quick technique that we used. The next detail we're going to paint real quick is on the tongue that's sticking out of the mouth of the Ghorgon. For this, I use 2 thin coats of Cameo Pink by Apple Paint. I just apply this on 2 basic layers directly onto the tongue, as well as any gums that are exposed inside of its maw. We don't need to be particularly neat when it comes to this detail, and the reason why is because we're going to put a lot of homemade blood and gore effect on the muzzle of this creature, so if we miss any spots or if we make any mistakes, it's not going to matter because that blood and gore effect is going to hide a lot of the mistakes in that mouth. So with most of the flesh completed with, the next we're going to focus on are on the hooves as well as horns of this miniature as well. Now this Ghorgon has a massive head crest on its head, not only with its horns but also like this decorative piece that's sunk between it, as well as the cloven hooves that this creature has. So because of that, we're going to put 2 thin layers of pigment paint by Apple Paint. Once again, you get this at your local Walmart for very cheap. We're not going to only use it for this color for that, but we're also going to use it for the blades on the arms as well. As you notice that 2 of the arms of this creature end in these blades, and those blades are, they're more like giant claws rather than actual metal blades or metallic blades. So we're going to pick out those details as well. We're going to do 2 thin layers of pigment paint on those bone details. And the reason why we're using this color is because it's a very, very, very dark gray with a little bit of a grit texture to it. So when we do any dry brushing to it, it's going to adhere that dry brushing texture to that texture. It's going to look amazing. And speaking of dry brushing, the very first thing, of course, we're going to do is we're going to dry brush the hooves, the blades, as well as the horns with some pewter gray. It's a nice dark gray color. It's going to be the very first layer of dry brushing that we do. As you can see, it brings us some of the details like the chips as well as the grooves and the bones of the the horns, as well as the blades and the hooves of the creature. And then we're going to do one more additional highlighting of dry brushing once again with Pale Gray by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart or Hobby Lobby. And once again, we're just going to do this like a dry brushing directly on the hooves, the blades of the hands, as well as the horns and the head crest of the creature, just to bring out that very last bit detail of brightness. So next we're going to paint now is the fur of the creature as well. This going to include the mane along its head, as well as the fur along its back, the mohawk hairdo that it has on the top of its head, as well as the fur on the back of the legs and the thighs. Now for the color I use for this one is a quite an unusual, unorthodox color. I use turquoise green by Apple Paint. And the reason why I use this turquoise green is because if you've watched videos with my Beastmen army, my Beastmen have a lot of blues, teals, as well as greens in the army. And I wanted this creature to kind of match with the overall color scheme that I chose for the Beastmen army. Plus, it's a nice contrasting color to all the browns and flesh colors we're using on this miniature, so that's the color I decided to use, and really pops and eye-catching. So I just put 2 thin layers of green turquoise on all over the parts of the fur that I wanted to be painted, and ready to move on to our next detail. And the next detail we're going to focus on real quick is a giant bell that's hanging from the neck of the Ghorgon. It kind of looks like a giant cowbell, which I guess in a sick sort of sense it kind of is. So we're going to pick that detail out with some 2 thin layers of Folk Arts copper. You can get this at your local Walmart. And the reason why I decided to do that is because I wanted that metallic bell to look like a copper bell, so that way it kind of sticks out as its own little detail against the rest of the miniature. Now that we've painted the fur as well as the bell for the creature, next we're going to do is a dry brush real quick with some Dodge Aqua. It's a nice pale kind of turquoise color that you can get at your local Hobby Lobby or Walmart. And we're going to dry brush this directly onto the fur that we did earlier in green turquoise, so that way you can see the individual strands of fur that this creature has, as well as on the bell that we painted in copper to kind of create this verdigris kind of effect on the bell as well. Just do a quick dry brushing real quick on all the parts that you did in green turquoise, and we're ready to move on to our next detail. The next major detail we're going to focus on in this creature is on the cloth elements. So this creature doesn't wear a lot of cloth, but it mainly has like wrappings and cording along its horns, as well as its arms, as well as the bell, as well as its clothing, as well as some scrap fabric along its legs, as well as other parts of his body. And like I said before, I use a lot of blue tones in my Beastmen army, so we're going to pick down 2 thin layers of True Blue by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby. It's a nice, rich, kind of like naval blue color that does a really good job contrasting all the flesh colors and the brown that we have in this miniature as well. So you can see we're doing things like the wrappings around the wrist guards of this creature, as well as any of the cording around its horns and antlers, fabric that it has along its loincloth, as well as its legs. We're just going to pick out any of those details that we want that fabric to be painted in. And now that we have all that blue fabric painted, the next detail we're going to do, of course, is to dry brush it all with some Sky Blue by Apple Paint. It's a nice pale sky blue color. I'm just going to apply it like a dry brush directly on the cording, so that way you can see the texturing of the cording, the raised surfaces of the different layers of cording, as well as some of the texturing that's on those pieces. Just do a quick dry brush on those areas, and we're ready to move on to our next detail. So the next significant detail that's on this miniature is all the skulls and pieces of bone that's all over this miniature as well. So we're going to do 2 thin coats of Taupe Gray by Apple Paint. Sorry, not by Apple Paint. I'm sorry, 2 thin coats of Taupe Gray by Anita's Acrylic. You can get this at your local Hobby Lobby. And we're going to put this on all the bone elements, like the skulls around the necklace that this thing is carrying, pieces of bone along its loincloth, its belts, as well as that giant skull that it has directly on top of its horns, and all those details. And this is like the front shot of the creature with all of its bone details. If we were to take the creature and turn it 180 degrees, you can see this has a lot of bone elements along the back, things like the bone details along its spines, along its back of its legs, as well as some of the arm grooves that it's wearing as well. Now, one of the details you really don't see too well, I do apologize, the angle of the camera wasn't very good for this, but it does have a piece of like warpstone necklace that it's wearing around its neck. So for that warpstone, we're going to pick out 2 thin layers of Holly Branch by Apple Paint. It's a nice, beautiful kind of Christmas green color that I use quite a bit in this channel, and that's to make it look like that, to make that warpstone kind of glow as well. And the reason why is because according to the lore of this creature, that's what ends up happening. They basically put a bunch of warpstone on a minotaur and eventually grows into a Ghorgon, basically. And for that green warpstone necklace, we're going to dry brush it real quick with some lime sherbet as well. We're also going to put this directly onto the eyes of the creature, so that way you can see both its eyes as well as the little bit of the dry brushing that we do on the warpstone tokens. That way it can be seen easier as well. And the last detail we're going to focus on the eyes are using some more lime sherbet. As you can see, we kind of picked that little eye color there on the right hand side. We do exactly the same for the left, so that way it has like this kind of glowing eye effect going on with this creature. So the last detail we're going to work on this miniature before we start working on the base is going to be all the metallic elements on this creature as well. And it does have quite a bit of metallic elements. We're going to use 3 colors primarily for this. We're going to use Folk Arts Gunmetal Gray, as well as Anita's Acrylic Aged Copper to make some of the bronze and brass details. We're also going to use some of Deco Arts Emperor's Gold for any of the gold details that we have on this creature as well. So things, for example, like the knuckle dusters, for example, we're going to paint that up Aged Copper. The blades, we're going to paint those up in Gunmetal Gray. And any kind of jewelry or iconography hanging from like the horns, for example, we're going to pick that out 2 thin layers of Emperor's Gold. So if you look this creature around from the 180 degrees, we did exactly the same thing. You see, we use that gold color for some of the arm greaves that this creature is carrying, the silver for the blades. Coming out the knuckle dusters. Knuckle dusters we did in Agent Copper as well. We're just going to pick out those metallic details. And the very last thing we're going to pick out is some of the leather that's kind of going across the thighs of the fur. As you can see, this creature's got some like cording along his thighs. I didn't want to really use a blue color for that just because I thought they could look really good against the green turquoise. So for that, we use burnt umber for that. Same thing, some of the wrappings around his legs as well. So the leather cording around the ankles where they have that blue fabric at, we just use 2 thin layers of burnt umber for that detail. Now, as for the base, we're going to paint the entirety of the base in 2 thin layers of Tuscan Teal by Appleboro paint. It's a nice dark turquoise color. It's exactly the same kind of color I used for the entirety of the Beastman army, so that way that teal and kind of turquoise look kind of contrasts nicely with all the browns, earth tones that's in my army's collection. And to bring out that detailing and texturing on the base, we're going to dry brush real quick with some Dutch Aqua by Folkart once again. As you can see, it does a really good job bringing out the texturing by catching the individual grains of sand, as well as the bob relief of the bases of the plastic pieces that are on the base as well. It should be noted I did buy this miniature secondhand, so that additional texturing that you see there with like the ruins and stuff like that, the previous owner actually glued those to the bases ahead of time, so I didn't conclude that to my cost just because I got it for free when I bought the miniature, so there you go. The last step we're going to do, of course, is an oil wash, and for this we like to use a mid-wax polyacrylic and mission oak color. A lot of people like to use Army Painter Strong Tone, which is perfectly fine. It's a wonderful color product that does exactly as advertised. The only problem though is it runs $37 a can, while mid-wax only runs $6.99. It does pretty much the same thing. What we're going to do is we're going to apply like a wash all over the entirety of the miniature as well as the base. And what this is going to do, of course, is going to do a couple of things. The oil wash, first of all, of course, is going to seep directly into the recess of the miniature, bring out a lot of those details we couldn't see before. So like the individual strands of cloth, the individual tufts of fur, the musculature of the miniature, the texturing on the bases, etc. The second thing that it also does too is it smooths out the transitions between the dry brushing as well as the base coating that we put on this miniature as well. As you can see, that chalky appearance that we had before is now gone because it smoothed out those transitions. And the third thing it also does too is it also darkens down the vibrancy and the value of the color that we use on the miniature. That's why we use such bright colors when we're painting this thing up, because the oil wash is going to darken it down. And here's a shot from the back of the creature as well, so you can see exactly how the oil washing is looking along the tufts of fur along its spine as well. Now you do need to let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours because it does have polyurethane in it, just like Army Painter Strong Tone does. So my suggestion to you is to use it as the very last step of your painting process, wait 24 hours and then return back to it and pick off where you left off. So I let this stuff dry and cure for about 24 hours. As you can see, it has a high gloss finish on the miniature, so it's very shiny, and it also is covered like this, a nice high gloss. I don't like that look for myself, but if you like that look, then more to you. But what I'm going to do real quick though is I'm going to paint the rim of the base in 2 thin layers of Territorial Beige. It's a nice contrasting color to like the turquoise that we have on the top texturing, and at the same time, this is the same basing technique I use for the entire Beastman army in the Studios collection. And of course, when we're done with that, the next thing we do, of course, is to spray the miniature down with a matte varnish spray. Now, this step, of course, is entirely optional. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But me, I don't care for the high gloss finish. I like a matte finish on my miniatures, so I just use some Krylon matte spray that I get from my local Walmart. I just give it the once over the entire miniature so that we have a more subdued and finished look for it. The last thing we're going to do, of course, is add some homemade blood and gore effect to the miniature. We're going to cover the hands, the mouth of the miniature, as well as the blades that it's swinging around. We're going to add quite a bit of this blood and gore effect. Also, if you end up noticing that you made any mistakes on your miniature as you were painting this guy up, then of course add this blood and gore effect to that to kind of cover up any mistakes that you might have made. Blood and gore effects, slime effects, they cover many a mistake when you're painting miniatures, which is always why I tell beginning players if they're brand new to painting and they don't know what army to pick a Nurgle army, because it's very easy to make mistakes. You just cover up with either slime or gore effect and you're perfectly fine. Now to achieve this gore effect, what we're going to do is we're going to mix some high gloss polyacrylic, which has no coloring whatsoever but does have a high gloss finish, and we're going to mix that up with a little bit of Anita's red, true red acrylic paint. We're going to mix that up in a 50-50 mixture and then apply it on all the parts that we have the gore effect on. When it dries, not only does it have that bloody gory effect, but also has that high sheen associated to it. It makes it look like it's kind of like, you know, sweat, slickery blood that's over its mouth, as well as the blades of the hand. And here's the end result of our miniature painting using our cheapskate method, bringing this up to a beautiful tabletop standard. It looks terrifying, it looks bloody, it looks dangerous, it looks absolutely chaotic, and I only spent a grand total of $49.14 on our painting your miniature to this level of standard. Now, if you were to try to do exactly the same thing from both Citadel as well as Army Painter, let's go ahead and talk about exactly what materials you need to buy from those two companies if you want to achieve the exact same result we did. Alright, so this is what you'll need to purchase from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to achieve the exact sort results we did, but using their products instead. You need to buy a can of Army Painter Army Painter Color Primer for Fur Brown for $17.99, as well as Pterodon Turquoise for $7.80. You also need to buy Thunderhawk Blue, Fulgrim Pink, Caliban Green, Cyberite Green, as well as Blue Horror. Each of those colors cost $4.55. You need to buy a pot of Wildwood for $7.80, as well as Cadian Flesh Tone, Baylor Brown, Slanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, Flayed One Flesh, Mephiston Red, Rakarth Flesh, Brass, and all those cost $4.55 for those. You need to buy a pot of Brass Scorpions, $7.80, McCrag Blue for $4.55, Lead Belcher for $7.80, as well as Screaming Bell. You need to buy a pot of Ulthuan Gray for $4.55, as well as Aethematic Blue and Retributive Armor. Those cost $7.80 a piece. You also need to buy a can of Army Painter Strong Tone for about $32, as well as Munitorian Varnish for $24. You also need to buy some Army Painter Basing Set for $18.99, PVA Glue from Citadel for $12.50, as well as Blood for the Blood God, which also costs $4.55 for that blood and gore effect. And assuming that you're purchasing everything for the very first time off this list, you're talking about a grand total investment of $228.33 if you wanted to paint up your miniature using up the Citadel as well as Army Painter method as well. Now when you subtract that from our cheapskate method of $49.14, you have the grand total savings of $169.19. So there you guys go. If you're looking for a way to save money on your miniatures wargaming hobby because everything is going up in terms of prices because of inflationary times that we live in, may I suggest switching to cheaper craft paints. After all, you achieve similar result at a fraction of the price, and you can use that money for other things like gasoline or food or groceries or whatever else you want to use that for instead. So there you guys have it. That's how we quickly and cheaply paint up the Ghorgon for your Beastmen Brayher armies in Warhammer the Old World. If you have any questions, comments, complaints, or any suggestions, please leave it down in the comments box down below. We always appreciate your input. Always feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe as well. That's good to do for this video, you guys. I am Commander Cheapskate. I will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.